Okay, so imagine if we knew for certainty that God existed, but also God's just a machine, and there's a whole bunch of aliens that are way more technologically advanced that we also know about and are just kind of around, but mostly leave us alone. That kind of gives you a tiny little taste of what is going on in Matter. This is another book by Iain M. Banks as part of his culture series. I was commissioned for this, as I have been with all the culture books that I have read so far, which is most of them at this point. I'm not sure how many are left. But this one, okay. You know what? That opening pitch didn't quite work. Okay, let's try this instead. Imagine if in Game of Thrones, the gods that they prayed to were alien beings who could actually physically step in and intervene. That's kind of closer. So most of this story takes place on what is called a shell world, which are these, it's not actually hollow, but it's an artificial planet that has these multiple layers. It's like a nesting doll, like all these levels. They can get smaller as you get closer to the core. What the residents of the, I think it's the 8th level that we're dealing mostly with, called the world god, which they do worship and treat as a god, but also like is a real thing. And so the shell worlds are in and of themselves kind of an interesting thing because they're actually very old. They predate pretty much any currently existing advanced civilization. So nobody really knows why they were made or what purpose they served. Like, people have tried to understand them, explore them. There are people who live in different levels on them, even though it's very dangerous to do so. They have like artificial suns and basically artificially created natural-esque environments on any given level. And so we're dealing with what largely kind of feels like, it's not quite stereotypical, but not atypical sort of fantasy style political struggle story, because we have this kingdom, with its warrior king who has just been betrayed and murdered by his closest advisor. Never trust the king's closest advisor ever. Like the one who's like, I trust this one with my life. Well, that's the one who's gonna kill you. So that happens, and the rightful heir to the throne, this is the oldest surviving son, because there was an older one who had died before the story is set. So Furbin is the rightful king. Witnesses his dad being murdered, but then also promptly flees because he doesn't know how to navigate the situation. So he just runs. And then there's Oromon, Furbin's younger brother, who becomes the prince regent. He doesn't actually become king because he's too young. So now the guy who killed the previous king is in charge. And it's a sort of fantasy-esque kind of setting. Like there's armor, but there's also munitions. There's also flying creatures that they can be on. But there's also a not very direct, but sort of a tangible presence of the more advanced societies. There's multiple in play. There's like the Morgenfeld and the Oct and a few others. And the people of this kingdom like know about these people. They're not being watched like secretly, the way that like Starfleet would secretly monitor less advanced civilizations. Like, no, they will just show up. They're not supposed to like steer, what's going on, but like they are a known quantity. And then additionally complicating things is Furbin's sister, Jan, who before the start of this story was basically, because women are not have very little value in this society, was basically given as a gift, for lack of a better way to put it, to an ambassador from the culture. And she now works for special circumstances, which is, the Black Ops CIA kind of thing that a shockingly high percentage of culture stories actually center around, actually. But she is she's a member of Special Circumstances, and she intends to go back because her father's dead. At the very least, she wants to pay respects, but things start to get more complicated as she starts to find herself wondering, wait a minute, there's something more going on here, because this should be just like an interkingdom squabble. But for some reason, some of the more technologically advanced societies in the area are like playing both sides and taking an interest. And why do they even care? And it sort of goes from there. And as the story unfolds, it's an interesting way to go about it, because like so much of it is set in this not particularly sci-fi setting that just has these sci-fi elements that are sort of shoved into it at various points. And it gives it a different overall feel from a lot of the culture stories. Like when it takes Jan a while to actually show up physically. Like she's in the story early on, but to actually arrive back at this shell world where she grew up. And while she's traveling to get there, it's much more typical of a culture story, as she works with ships and ship abbatoids and ship mines and ambassadors, and has to do these negotiations and all this other stuff. It's much more typical of a culture story. But then we keep going back to like the young Prince Regent, who is actually shockingly very competent and probably will be a very good ruler if he lives to hold the title. But at the same time doesn't know that he can't trust this guy who his dad trusted implicitly. So there's just this mix of elements and going back and forth, and it's interesting. It kind of lost me at the end, though. Not that it's bad, but okay, you know what? We're gonna hold on that because that's kind of spoilery. I didn't super enjoy the ending, not because it was terrible, but it felt rushed, and while it was technically set up, it was basically a resolution to what I had considered background storytelling, world building questions, and it decided to make that its finale, and I was like, oh, okay. I'll get more into that later because I'm gonna have to spoiler that as a topic. I noticed a certain overabundance of description, and I don't think it's actually different from other culture books. I think the difference is that usually a culture story jumps locations a lot more than this does, taking us to entirely new ships with new personnel on board, going to different planets, different aliens, and very alien aliens, not just like, the Star Trek thing of humans with weird foreheads. And it always felt justified that we got these very detailed explanations because we were getting a whole new thing. Here, so much of it is set, in the shell world, in this kingdom. And while we're going to different locations within it, it starts to feel a lot more samey. There's towards the back end when Orman, the Prince Regent, gets kind of sent off, so that he's not in the way, to this archaeological dig, sort of at these sort of combination waterfall / ruins / like it's very interesting, but it was like every scene that was set there, because we were looking at technically a different part of the ruin of the excavation. Banks would go through this entire elaborate description of it again, and like it wasn't technically repetitive because he wasn't saying the exact same things, and it was technically like a different part of the same thing, but because it was so close to other descriptions we had, it started to feel a lot more repetitive than I think has been the case for other instances. Because again, I don't think he actually is over describing things any more than he ever has. It just felt like it was overdone here because way more of the locations were similar enough to each other that I started to notice the repetition. Whereas I feel like in other stories, whenever we get a brand new location, I'm like, oh, well, this justifies the amount of work you're pouring into these descriptions. It felt a little bit less justified here. On a good note, the characters are quite good. Some of them actually ended up having a lot more to them than I expected. Jan is interesting, and she's kind of typical of SC, of Special Circumstances, in that she's a little cold, a little detached, but incredibly competent. And then Furbin, actually both Furbin and Orman, I found to be really fascinating characters, especially the more time we spend in their heads, because when we sort of first meet them, I'm like, oh, I know what your archetypes are. And it's not that they aren't those archetypes, but sort of watching them in the circumstances that they're in for an extended period and learning what they are beyond just that archetype, it worked pretty well. Best character in the thing, Holtz. That's Furbin's attendant, servant. I love Holtz. He's just the best. He has the best. Oh, okay. Well, this is what's happening now. Kind of attitude, but not like that snarky. Oh, well, that happened sort of Marvel thing, but just like he's a guy who rolls with the punches. I think it comes from the fact that he's used to attending royalty, so he's used to just being in the presence of things that are well above his pay grade. And so when he starts dealing with aliens and stuff, he'll ask questions and they'll give him a straightforward answer, and he'll grasp what he can and kind of accept that some of it just goes over his head. And I kind of just get the sense that he's spent most of his life with a lot of stuff that goes over his head. So he's like, okay, well, I understand that part. I don't understand the rest of it, but I got that bit. Okay. And I love his attitude. I love his relationship and his dynamic with Furbin. Holtz is great. Holtz is the best. There's some other good characters as well. There's another ship Avatoid who's the name I'm blanking on at the moment, but I ended up liking a lot. Had kind of almost an Errol Flynn kind of feel to him. I tend to like the ship Avatoids. Like Demyson was my favorite character in what was it? Surface Detail. Anyways, coming back to this. So I'm going to spoiler from here because I want to talk about the ending and why it didn't quite land right. So if you enjoy this series and you haven't read this one, I don't think there's any reason to not read it, even though I found, I think, a few more faults in this one than I usually have. But anyway, that's a spoiler warning. I'm going to talk the ending. So basically the reason that races like the Oct and the Morganvel and like these others are interested is because in this excavation that's happening at the falls, there's this sort of ancient thing. They find what they call the casket, and they open it up, and it's kind of your standard deadly MacGuffin, It's the Ark of the Covenant. It's the engineer in Prometheus. It's the thing that people are like, oh, we want this, and then it just kills them because it's bad or it's evil or they weren't meant to have it or what have you. And the conclusion felt very rushed. Like this threat gets introduced and then wipes out a massive part of the cast, including people I was really invested in, Orman in particular. And then it's just like, well, now we have to stop this thing. And as I said, it is actually set up because it's left behind by the Iln, which is another very ancient race that had sort of a mission of trying to destroy all of the shell worlds. So the possibility of what this thing was set up. Where it comes from is established in advance. And the ideas of these, very ancient pieces of technology still being incredibly dangerous, all of that is technically set up. So I can't say it comes out of nowhere. But as I said, a lot of it felt like just interesting world building details. And in and of itself, that's a good way to build up to your big climax. You've just kind of been seeding it in the background. But on the other hand, it ended up feeling like a resolution to background storytelling details as we just wipe out Orman and a bunch of other people, and it just suddenly, it's like, oh, like the story that you were actively telling, you just kind of wiped the board clean. And now we just have to stop this thing that's going to literally destroy the world. And part of it might be like immediately ramping up to this thing will destroy the whole world is just such a cheap way to raise the stakes. It doesn't matter who does it, especially if you're doing it as rapidly as this does. Again, like the idea that something wants to destroy shell worlds is already established. So again, not out of nowhere, but having it not be out of nowhere isn't quite enough to save it. It just felt like Banks thought that actually resolving like the struggle for the throne or whatever wasn't a grand enough conclusion. So he has this sentient weapon wake up and kill half the cast and then threaten the world because that's a bigger finale, I guess. I'm not saying that's what he actually did, but that's what it feels like. And it actually, oddly enough, it made me think of the ending of Player of Games, which, like, to be fair, my memory of that book is pretty faded by this point. But I remember having a similar issue with that where the climax was working for me up until it suddenly, like, blew way out of proportion. And now, like, oh, the whole planet's going to come apart. And I'm like, why? Like, you built up and executed the climax that you had, but you just suddenly raised the stakes out of nowhere. And had this turn into a much bigger thing than it feels like it needs or even wants to be. So it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. So I probably, because again, like the idea is really interesting to take this more fantasy feeling setting, but have it exist in this sci-fi universe. It's a really interesting idea, but I really do think it drops the ball at the end. And it's not even like a bad conclusion. It's just not the conclusion that, and it probably also doesn't help that Accession, which is probably still my favorite. It's between that and Surface Detail, but Accession is probably still my favorite. Like that did, massive, unknowable, advanced, technological thing so much better than this. That might be contributing to the issues as well. I don't know. I think I probably would put this at the bottom if I were to rank the ones that I've read so far. Like Accession and Surface Detail are right up there towards the top. I think this is at the bottom, and the rest are kind of scattered in the middle. Yeah. Yeah. So, a little mixed on this one, but Matter. Have you read it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. They all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lipfula, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Claire Wright, Dave Hall, Snark Shark, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Daphne Matthews, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Twilord, Kay Johnston, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Barabajoggle, Magdalena, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and a couple of additional names I'll have to dub in because I forgot to add them. And here I am with those dub names. Thank you to the Demon Bunny, Vin Jost, and Sarvis. I'm a little bit distracted, you might have noticed. Everyone's reintegrated. Don't worry about Navarro. He got rehoused. He's completely happy where he is. But this is the mischief now. And it's a lot.